Welcome in, college football fans and Kentucky Wildcat fans alike. Welcome to the First and Long College Football Show. I am Marcus, that's Mason, and we are continuing our countdown of the top teams in the Power Four conferences of college football headed into the 2024 college football season. And we're so glad that you're here. You have found a new home for your college football, and we hope that you love it. And we hope that you'll hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, show us some love. But this one especially is being put out there for you Kentucky fans, and we are really glad that you are here to hang out with us. Mason, how are you today, man?
Hey, doing good. Ready to talk some Kentucky Wildcats football. Very exciting season for the Wildcats coming up this year. New quarterback, new offensive coordinator, new offensive lines coach. There's a lot of changes, particularly on that offensive side of the football, which was pretty bad last season, and I'm excited for it. I know Kentucky fans are as well.
Yes, we are. No, I'm not a Kentucky fan, but I am a SEC fan, and I know you are as well, Mason. We watch tons and tons of SEC football every single season, and Kentucky is definitely part of that. You know, as we were diving into the Kentucky Wildcats, I noticed it was hard to find the spring game, the film and everything. Lots of cell phone footage from the sidelines and things like that. Um, you know, not many people in the stands there, not much tackling going on, and quite honestly, Mason, I didn't learn a ton from the spring game with Kentucky, but let's kind of jump into the offense and this team as a whole. Coming off of a 7-6 season last year, Mark Stoops has been a symbol of consistency. I feel like in the SEC, good not great seems to be kind of what you see year in and year out from Kentucky. They finished out. I felt kind of strong, but last year with Devin Leary, I felt like the expectations were very high for Devin Leary, and he came in and kind of underperformed expectations. And as you said, um, Butch Hamden is coming in to work with Brock Vandagriff, who's coming in from Georgia. So you got a guy coming over from Boise State, and you got a quarterback coming over from Georgia to head up this offense. Mason, I know you're a Georgia Bulldog fan, as am I. What do you think about Brock Vandagriff finally getting his starts in the SEC, but it's not in the red and black, is it? It's in the blue and white.
Yeah, I mean, candidly, as a Georgia fan, this was a guy that I was hoping I would get to see play for Georgia at some point, and but at the same time, though, let's not kid ourselves. He's kind of a mystery. This is a dark horse quarterback in a lot of ways, and I think as a Georgia fan, seeing him probably play more than just about every Kentucky fan did. Seeing the third and fourth quarter plays that he was getting into and making last year, and seeing his progression, just from the spring games, from when he was a freshman to when he left as a junior. I I have to say he definitely progressed and got better, but I don't know that we ever saw him at his ceiling or at his potential in any way. I think that this is a guy who is probably has a pretty high floor, and probably has a pretty high ceiling, I think. But ultimately, with the offense that Kentucky has coming in, I don't think that they need him to play out of his mind. Now, if he does, if he hits and he's an elite quarterback, Kentucky's in for a really fantastic season, I think. But they don't need that. Last year with Devin Leary, they didn't need that, and what they got out of Leary was probably the most underwhelming performance for a transfer in the entire country last year. I think that he had the most hype for what he put out on the field, and underperformed gravely. I think that was just one of the worst transfers in the offseason last year. And I don't think that that's what you're going to get out of Brock Vandagriff. I think you're getting a guy who is smart with the football, but can also be a gunslinger at times too if he needs to. I feel like he's going to position himself really well to where he's not going to be the reason why Kentucky's losing football games. Whereas Devin Leary, I think last year kind of was that person.
Right. Yeah, and I think with Brock Vandagriff, I think you're getting a little something different from the quarterback position that you've gotten over the last few years. Even with Will Levis, he could at times use his feet to be effective, but I feel like I feel like Brock Vandagriff is going to be one of those guys that's going to be able to lower his shoulder at times whenever you need that extra yard, and that's something I don't feel like Kentucky's really had behind the line at quarterback. Um, all in all, from what I saw from the spring game, it seemed like Brock looked good. It seems like it's his team. And, I just want to kind of highlight the fact that Kentucky overall has clearly taken a path with quarterbacks that is through the transfer portal. They're not recruiting high school quarterbacks anymore, like hardly at all. And everybody who's actually playing there is transfer from somewhere, and they went and did this for the depth in that quarterback room as well. It's not just the starter. So I just want to kind of highlight the how Kentucky is going about getting all these quarterbacks into Lexington, and how they're recruiting the quarterback position. And whether you think it's smart or not, or you're indifferent on the matter, I'd love for you to let me know as a Kentucky fan in the comment section. Let me know what you think about that strategy that Mark Stoops is using. I have a lot of respect for him, and I think he's doing the best he can in that situation. Let's talk about the offensive line, Mason, because this was an issue last year. I mean, it was just flat out an issue. And whenever you think about Kentucky, or at least whenever I do, because I know what Kentucky's really all about, I think about lines of scrimmage, and I think about a physicality, a level of physicality that is really unmatched, except for maybe just a handful of teams at the very top of the SEC. So last year was a disappointment, and with Nick Saban leaving and going into retirement, Eric Wolford has come back from Bama to coach the offensive line this year, and I think that's a big deal, because this is a guy that was here a couple years ago, I think back in 21, and did a really, really good job with that offensive line. But you've got Eli Cox, which I've heard. I've heard people say a couple different things on this, but apparently he moved from center to guard. Marquez Cox is back. Dylan Ray's back. Jagger Burton is back. You bring in Jalen Farmer from Florida. You bring in Gerald Mincey from Tennessee. So this really, for all intents and purposes, is a 100% reworked as offensive line as far as the depth goes. But those starting guys are all back, Mason. Most of them are all back. And I think that this is going to turn into a pretty decent unit on an offense that's pretty damn good overall.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the biggest piece of this is going to be Eric Walford coming in as the offensive line coach. This is, by all accounts, an excellent offensive line coach. And I think that they were lacking in some direction last season, and lacking in experience. Look, you can have all the talent in the world, but on that offensive line, if you're not playing together consistently, it's going to be tough. And we knew that going into last season, that this was going to be a tough position group for Kentucky to overcome because of the lack of experience. Will Levis was blessed with that offensive line, and now I think going into this season, you're going to see a little bit better play, at that offensive line position, and I think it's going to open up some holes for a guy like Chip Trainum, who I'm sure we'll talk about here in just a little bit.
Well, let's get into Chip Trainum then. Let's go into the running back room and let's kind of talk about that, and then we'll talk about our pass catchers after that. So, running back room, as you said, bring in Chip Trainum over from Ohio State. And another guy that apparently is going to be, I think, kind of that number 2 running back is going to be Demi Sumo Kangbay, something like that, man. I tried so hard. But he's a senior. And so I feel like with those two guys, you got a really good 1-2 punch. And then you got some young guys around them. I know that Kentucky was trying to go into the transfer portal in the spring and bring in a running back. What's your thoughts on the running back room? You feel like they're pretty strong? I definitely feel good about Chip Trainum. It's a running back fleeing Ohio State from that running back room. That makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, you're not going to play in that room unless you're, one of the best in the game. So it makes sense for a guy like Chip Trayanum to leave in Ohio State and go to a Kentucky, and it doesn't really throw up any red flags for me. So, what is your thoughts on the running back room and Chip Trayanum, and how deep is this room? Because I think the 1-2 is really good. It's just going to be a matter of how deep are they.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of my thing. I think Sumo is going to be just fine. I have full confidence in Trainum. Um, I know last year Sumo was kind of coming back from injury, so maybe that's why you saw some sort of limited numbers on top of having a weaker offensive line. But that's a guy who at NC State averaged 5.5 yards a carry. So I think that the potential is there for him to do really well. So I'm kind of looking to see his numbers shoot up with a better offensive line that he's going to be running behind. And like you, I'm kind of curious about this the depth here because behind those two, you've got a redshirt freshman and two freshmen coming in. So
Yeah.
let's kind of see what these guys are going to end up becoming because Tavani Mizell is a guy who as a running back recruit was a top 100 overall player, which is tough to do as a running back. And so I think if I'm not mistaken, I think he's got a little bit of wiggle out of that South Florida, out of South Florida, and he's kind of one of those electric playmakers, and so, but still at 5'11", 210 pounds. So not undersized by any means. I think he's physically capable of coming in and, being a contributor and somebody who adds a little different dynamic, playmaking ability to that running back room.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's like I said, I feel good about the top end, and we've said it time and time again on our channel though, Mason. There are freshmen that can come in and contribute in the run game at running back in college football, and we do see it every single year. Where these young guys typically run into trouble is in pass protection situations, trying to help out and chip block with the quarterback or things like that, or knowing when to take off from that and go catch a pass. So those are the kind of things that I feel like takes a little bit of time and takes some reps, but I'm sure that Mark Stoops can figure out a way to incorporate some of those talented young guys in with that running back room, and they'll be just fine. And then let's kind of talk about the pass catchers, Mason, wide receiver and tight end. Wide receiver is just kind of a barrage of really nice players, I feel like. And as you can see on your screen there, with the offensive transfer additions, Jamori Macklin is a guy that has come in from North Texas, circa Missouri, before that. And he had over 1,000 yards receiving last year, 57 receptions, as you can see there, 11 touchdowns. So a guy who not only got his yardage, but was scoring touchdowns for North Texas last year. He's going to be catching passes in Kentucky this year. And he's going to be playing alongside, I think, a couple of really, really good wide receivers. I dare say maybe top 10 style wide receivers, SEC wide, Dane Key and Berrien Brown. Dane Key, as to be expected, showed his face in the spring game and was catching passes and scoring touchdowns and things. And I think that's where a lot of the hope lies with a new quarterback like Brock Vandagriff. I'm sure he's sitting in his dorm room or apartment thinking, man, I can't wait to throw to these guys. So I feel like that's a pretty daggum good room. What do you think about the wide receivers? And sure is nice to bring back a guy like Dane Key and Berrien Brown, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. Another deadly 1-2 punch, similar to the running back room there, and on top of that, I think you've got sort of a sleeper pick, like you mentioned with Macklin, but also with the true sophomore Anthony Brown Stevens. This was a guy who played in all 13 games last year, but had only, I believe, 4 or 5 catches. So, a former 4-star recruit, really, really slight guy, 5'10", 168. So he plays that slot position. I'm anxious to see him take another step forward and kind of reach his potential. But if you're looking for a sleeper pick to maybe see kind of come to fruition this year, I think that Brown Stevens is probably the one. And one thing to mention is No Raymond Cottrell after spring.
Mm-hmm.
He hits the transfer portal after coming in from Texas A&M.
Yep.
Not sure exactly what happened there, but he was a guy who was talented as all get out, coming out of high school, top 150 overall player, and just seems to have something going on maybe between the ears there that's causing him to bounce around from place to place. So no Raymond Cottrell this year in this wide receiver group, but ultimately I think that they've got a really good 4 wide receivers. I think we're gonna have to wait and see on the others. You know, you got Brandon White, the transfer coming in, Fred Ferrier, and
Yep.
also true freshman coming in, Hardley Gilmore and Santos Alvarez. So a lot of young talent there, a lot of new talent, and I'm excited to see what this wide receiver group ends up looking like with a quarterback that is hopefully more capable than Leary. I think he is, and certainly. By all accounts, this is going to be a better offensive line than it was last year. So, to me, I think that the offense as a whole going to take a step forward. And ultimately, I'm anxious to see in what capacity. Right? Is it the traditional physical Kentucky Wildcats football that we're used to seeing and ground and pound up front with that offensive line, like you mentioned, or are we going to see a little bit of finesse, a little bit more passing? I kind of think it's going to be a mixture of both, where you're going to see the running game hit, you're going to see the quarterback take off and run a good bit, but you're also going to see a quarterback who's capable of having a 35 touchdown season with 3,000 yards, right?
Yep.
So, and that's what you want in this day and age in college football is an offense that can do both, that can take what the defense is giving them and run with it. So, you know,
Yep.
if they want to play back, hey, let's run the football. If they want to load the box, let's throw it deep. And I think that's if you're a Kentucky fan, that's what you've got to be most excited about this football team, this offense. Is the versatility that you have with the playmakers on the perimeter and a solid offensive line up front. You got to think that in comparison to last year, right? The stock is up for this offense for the Kentucky Wildcats.
Well, we know that with Bush Hamden, they're going to run the football.
Mm-hmm.
We know that to be true. But what I think is going to change dramatically with this offense. This was the slowest moving offense. Like last year, man, they were just slugging along through the game, getting back to the line at the very last second, snapping the ball at the very last second. I don't think you're going to see as much of that. I think you're going to see a lot quicker development. I know that listening to Brock Vandagriff after their spring game, they're really looking forward to the headset mics.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very much looking forward to that because, as Brock Vandagriff put it, this gives him a leg up on everyone on the field. And having that headset in his ears, it gives him a heads up for lots of different things. And I think that it's going to allow them to be one of the things that's going to allow them to move a lot quicker out there and snap the football. Let's and then tight end. I wanted to just kind of mention tight end. It doesn't seem to me like there's one guy that's just like, gonna get all the snaps. Josh Caddis seemed like one to me that really was popping on paper to me in the spring game. But you got Kamari Anderson, Jordan Dingle, Jack Monday, and Tanner Lemister. So you got a few options there, and several of those guys had catches and a few yards here and there. I think you just got to kind of see who's going to I would bet Josh Caddis is going to be the go-to guy as far as pass catching tight ends, but I'm sure there'll be opportunities where they'll be running two tight ends in the bigger sets and things like that. So you'll get a chance to probably see all those guys throughout the season. Anything else on the offense, Mason, before we move over to defense?
No, I think that pretty much covers the offense. Like I said, just ultimately, I think this is a much better offense than it was last year. And, you mentioned some of the slow play last season. I think that a lot of that had to do with Kentucky just kind of knowing where they were as an offense and doing their best to give the defense a little bit of a break because that was certainly their strong suit. And I think that it is going to be this year as well, the defense that is.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that defense, it should be a good one, Mason. And as you can see on your page here or on your screen, you got 3 guys coming in, and these are the 3 guys that I think through the transfer portal anyway are going to have a chance to make the biggest difference for this defense. But let's start at defensive line, because honestly, if you want to say that there's one anchor to this defense, it's got to be this defensive line and this defensive line room. Very, very impressive to be able to hold on to all these guys, Mason. And I'm not more excited to watch any defensive lineman, I don't think, in the SEC more than I'm excited to see Deion Walker. 6'6", 350 pounds, great anchor, powerful rush, moves around like a very nimble refrigerator. I would be absolutely petrified of this guy if I was on the field. I mean, the way he collapses pockets is it pops on paper and on screen. And I think that we're in for a big season for Deion Walker at defensive tackle. But beyond him, you've got Octavius Oxendine, Keyshawn Silver, a guy who I think is definitely 1 year better and is going to be a nice piece on that defensive line. This is a deep room, though, and it goes much deeper than that. Brad White, the defensive coordinator, has the cup runneth over with defensive linemen. What do you think about the D-line group?
Oh man, I mean, you've got 9 legitimate defensive linemen, and actually all of them were out in the spring game, so they didn't even play. So, which I think is a positive, because it gets your backups to those 9, and what's interesting is they typically only play 3 linemen, so they may be going to a 4 down lineman sort of look here, just to use their strength. I mean, they've got so much talent in that room. They might as well kind of expand that defensive line. I have no idea if that's even in the works or not. I'm just kind of saying, maybe I'll email the defensive coordinator or something and let him know my thoughts on that.
Brad White would appreciate that.
Maybe so. Maybe he doesn't know that. But in the spring game, you get those younger guys some looks. You get the backup some looks, and I think that they're going to be better for it. If any position could use more depth at any point in time, it's the defensive line for any team, just about. And Kentucky is no different, especially if you've got 9 defensive linemen out in the spring game. That's a little bit of a concern from a health standpoint, but I'm sure that there were other reasons on top of health. But yeah, you mentioned it. Deion Walker, I think, is an absolute stud. Somebody that you can just plug and play, and he's a bigger guy, so you love to have him in those goal line sets. But he's also nimble enough to be in there for those passing downs. He's an absolute catalyst for them at defensive line, at the defensive tackle position, and I think that with him, it expands what you're able to do so much, because he's just a freaking space eater right there in the middle of that defensive line, and allows guys and getting into the linebacker room here, like JJ Weaver, who I really like, coming off the edge at outside linebacker, coming in for his 6th year as a senior, and has played in this will be his 5th year actually playing. So he's put up some really impressive stats. I mean, had a season where he had 10 tackles for a loss. Coming off last year, he had 8.5 tackles for a loss with 45 tackles. So, this is a guy who's played really successfully, played really well, and I think is a huge get for them. It's almost like getting a transfer player for Kentucky, in this linebacker room. JJ Weaver coming back, so much experience that's going to speak volumes for this defense, and also leading the other players on this defense, leading an incoming transfer like JDJ or Pop Johnson, coming in. And look, Dumas Johnson left Georgia. Yes. He lost his starting spot due to injury. Yes. But this is a future NFL player. So I think that he's going to come in and elevate this defense even more, which is a scary thing. And also, he's got a chip on his shoulder. So I think that that's going to say a lot about I think that that's going to add to what he brings to the table this year. I think he's going to work his tail off this offseason. and he's going to come in with a full head of steam and is going to be ready to prove that he's an NFL linebacker.
Yeah. Absolutely. Jamon Dumas Johnson is a guy that you talked about JJ Weaver having some great stats, and Jamon Dumas Johnson has some great ones as well. 126 tackles in his career, 17 tackles for a loss, 3.5 sacks. Um, it's a guy that's got a lot of experience and was at Georgia whenever Georgia won back-to-back national championships. This guy knows what it takes to win. Just like Brock Vandagriff coming over, Brock Vandagriff has seen what it takes to win college football games and compete for championships. And Jamon Dumas Johnson is no different. I loved what you said about JJ Weaver, and I had some numbers on him. This dude has played in 48 games. That is unbelievable experience. Really, not many guys have had much more experience, honestly, than JJ Weaver. I liked Tyrese Fearby and Jacob Smith are a couple of young guys I think that you ought to keep your eyes on, keep your ears open, and if presented an opportunity, I think could go in and produce for the Kentucky Wildcats. These are a couple of guys that were highly recruited and highly sought after, and I think they could be nice pieces on this defense for the future as well. So Brad White continues to do good work for Kentucky at the defensive coordinator position. Continues to keep the cupboard full with defensive players, and feel like he's done a really good job over the last few years. And I think that this is going to be a really good Kentucky defense. But before we get quite that far, let's talk about the last piece of this defense, and it is that secondary. Kentucky fans, you probably already know this. But if there's a weakness on this defense, it's the secondary. It definitely is. And I think that there's some answers. I think that there are some answers to this. At the safety position, you bring in Christian Story. But, Mason, I know this guy came from Alabama, but he hasn't played a lot. We don't know exactly what Christian Story is. And that's not to say that he's not going to turn out to be a good player, but he does not have a ton of experience. You do bring back Maxwell Harrison. That is huge. That's one of the best corners in the league. Second team all SEC last year, honorable mention and All-American mentions. So this guy comes back. He had 5 interceptions last year, which tied a record for the most interceptions in a season since 2006 for the Kentucky Wildcats. So you've got some good pieces coming back. But I do love how Kentucky has been aggressive in the transfer portal after the spring practice and spring game and went out and got a guy like DJ Waller that you see pictured on your screen here. DJ Waller was a guy who got in and played some for Michigan last year, a national championship team. And I'm thinking that this is – look, if you're going to get somebody in the springtime after spring practice, the only reason you get them is to play them immediately. Because you're not going to get them to transfer to your school to sit on the bench for a year and then play the following year, right? So obviously this is a spot that they felt like they needed to address. And this guy, Kentucky needs DJ Waller to take up that opposite side of Maxwell Harrison. And if he can effectively do that, then that's going to answer a lot of questions. There's a few guys that are kind of, just off in the background, young guys, guy like Jansen Dunn. I think he's going to play some corner. He's going to be kind of like that slot corner. Hardaway is back. I think that they're going to be using him on and off. If I had hesitations about this defense, it would be with the secondary and against another team that's got a really good passing offense. I've got some questions, especially early on in the season when we don't have them answered yet. So what are your thoughts on the secondary? Do you agree with me that that would be the weakness of the defense if there was one?
Yeah, if there was one, I do think it's a pretty strong defensive backfield. I mean, as we've been doing these breakdowns, we noticed that the defensive backfield is a weakness for a lot of teams. In comparison to a lot of even SEC teams, I think this looks pretty deep and it looks like a pretty good secondary overall. You mentioned Maxwell Harrison, guys. He's got more
You know
catches.
he's going to be he's going to do his job. I'm not worried about him at
Absolutely.
all. Yeah.
Absolutely. You just his job is to be out there on the field, and if you're out there on the field, you don't throw at Maxwell Harrison. Like, just
Yeah.
don't throw at him at all, because he will. If you throw at him on a consistent basis, he will have more catches or interceptions than the receiver that you're passing to him
Yeah.
against. So I hope that was clear. It made sense in my head when I said it. But but
Damn
anyways,
straight.
he's he's an absolute lockdown corner. Stay away from him, and you might have pretty good success. But then you've got to go to the other side. You mentioned Waller. We'll see if he's going to be sort of the guy there. But also Hardaway was was the number 9 overall transfer portal number 9 overall player in the transfer portal last year. Didn't quite mesh, didn't quite live up to that billing, but I think that there's some potential there. Jordan Lovett was a All-American honorable mention last year at safety. And then you got Zion Childress, who, like you mentioned, Christian Story might be filling his spot, but Childress is also a Senior Bowl on the Senior Bowl watch list. So for whatever that's worth, I think when you add Christian Story and you add Waller into this defensive backfield, you've got 6 guys to fill 4 positions. I feel pretty good that they're going to find the 4. And ultimately, if they stay healthy, I think this is going to be a pretty good defensive backfield as well. I really like what I've seen out of the Kentucky defense so far as it looks on paper. Does it come to fruition? Are they going to be able to step up with the big boys and play against teams that are 2 and 3 deep on offense? Maybe not, but I do think that this is one of the better defenses in the SEC. I would put them, I would probably have to put them around 5, honestly, in the SEC, as I'm kind of just doing the math in my head. I think that this is going to be, once again, the strong point for the Kentucky Wildcats this year. But ultimately, we mentioned earlier that we think that the offense got a little bit better. I also think the defense got better. And that's saying a lot, because this was a pretty good defense last year as well.
Yeah. I definitely think overall it's I don't know, we're going to look at the schedule here in a minute, so I don't know if the record is going to show how much better of a season it's going to be this year than versus last year, but I think we're about to see a better product on the field overall with the Kentucky Wildcats this coming season versus what we did last year. I think this is going to be a much better team, and I'm very excited to see. Let's look at that schedule for 2024. Obviously, it looks a lot different for all SEC teams as Texas and Oklahoma have moved in and joined the Southeastern Conference. So everybody's schedule is a little bit shook up. But projected win loss over and under 6.5 wins for the Kentucky Wildcats. As you just kind of look at it, obviously the game against Georgia sticks out and the game against Texas sticks out there, but also the game against Ole Miss. That you're going to play that game on the road. That's going to be your first road game of the year. That'll be Brock Vandagriff's first road game ever starting as an SEC quarterback. I think that's going to be really interesting. We'll have to see what Ole Miss's defense is going to look like. But as I kind of look at this, I'm looking for teams that got really good quarterbacks and wide receivers, and I feel like those are going to be kind of maybe just a bit of a bugaboo for this type of defense. We'll see. Maybe that secondary is really good. I haven't seen them play yet. I reserve the right to change my mind if I want to. But Texas, Georgia, those are 2 teams that really kind of stand out to me. It seemed like tough games to win there, especially considering the Texas one there is going to be on the road. You end the season there with Louisville. It seems like Kentucky's kind of owned Louisville here lately. And I see some easy wins on this schedule as well. So, what are your thoughts with this schedule? I mean, anytime you get Vandy as an SEC opponent, that's always nice, right? And I see a Murray State. I see some kind of Golden Eagle there that's not a big team. I don't know what they are. The Ohio Bobcats I see on there. So those are automatic dubs, right?
Right. Yeah, I think you've got 4 automatic dubs right there. So can you get 3 out of the remaining 8? I think so. I think that this is like we said, a better team than it was last year overall on paper, by the personnel as far as the players as well as the coaching personnel. So to me, broadly speaking, without even looking at the schedule, I say, yeah, this team can at least get 7 wins. Then you go into the schedule and look at, okay, we've got 4 wins, like you just mentioned there, automatically. I think that South Carolina may be sneaky good, but I don't think that in week 2 they're going to be that good. So I'm going to
Yeah.
give Kentucky the win there. I don't think Kentucky will be ready for Georgia in week 3. I think Georgia is further along as a program, of course, but also as a team, as this upcoming year's team, I think has more experience playing together and a little bit more cohesive of a unit. So I don't think that even at a home game, I don't think Kentucky is really going to be able to stand up to Georgia at that point in the season in week 3. Ole Miss on the road, I'm leaning Ole Miss. This if Vandergriff hits at quarterback, I'm telling you, this team could win 9 games. Right. I think that is the ceiling for Kentucky is about 9 games, maybe 10. If he's just an absolute stud and this defense really plays well, I like if this is a top 10 defense in the country, which I think it does have the potential to be if people stay healthy, then and they hit it at Brock Vandagriff, at the quarterback position, maybe you're talking 10 wins. But Ole Miss would be one that I would say, okay, we'll know after that game if this is a playoff contender or another decent Mark Stoops team, right? Florida, I think you win, but they're kind of gaining some momentum. Auburn is going to be a really fun game to watch. I think that game's going to be really competitive. They do get Auburn at home, which I think is going to help Kentucky
Yeah.
for sure. Tennessee is supposed to be a really good team this year, so we'll have to wait and see what Tennessee does on paper. As I'm looking at it, I really like Kentucky's defense against Tennessee's offense. I think that's a kind of a bad matchup for Tennessee, but they do get that game in Knoxville, so maybe that's a little bit of a tough environment for Brock Vandagriff and this Kentucky defense and team in general. And then Texas, we keep mentioning Texas and the holes that they have in the secondary. When it's week 12 of the season, maybe or I guess it'll be week 13 out of 14 since we got 2 buys now this year. But I think that maybe, maybe Texas has that shirt up a little bit in the secondary. So that could be a really tough game in Austin.
Or maybe it's just worse. Maybe
It could
everybody's
just be
hurt.
worse.
Yeah.
You never know. You never
Yeah.
know. And again, if they're able to go over the top, that's going to be the difference, right? Can they go over the top? We know that Texas is a little bit. They're not as good as they were last year on the defensive line. So maybe you have a little bit more capabilities to run there against that defense. Maybe not. So maybe it is a defense you still want to pass against. Nonetheless, they've got to be able to take advantage of whatever it is that Texas gives them on defense in order to win that game. It's going to be a very tough matchup. And then Louisville, who I think this year Kentucky should be able to beat Louisville again. I think that this is a team that probably is going to be overhyped going into the season. We've got a Louisville breakdown that's coming here in the next couple of days. But ultimately, I think that looking at this Kentucky team, they've got a little bit more depth, a little bit better personnel overall. I think that they would end up winning that game. So I'm going to say if Brock Vandagriff hits, this is an 8 or 9 win season for the Kentucky Wildcats. I'd love it for Kentucky if it were 9, obviously. I'd love it for Brock Vandagriff if it were 9. But if he doesn't come to fruition, if he's not the quarterback that we think he is, then I still don't see them going, having less than 6 wins. I think that would be a real surprise if they end up with 5 wins. But to me, it's a safe bet to say, hey, I think they'll get 7. So I actually really like this bet for a win-loss over/under at 6.5. I'd take the over all day on this one and feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, I think we kind of agree on that. I think 7.5 is the number in my head for Kentucky, and because you can lose to Georgia, Tennessee, or you can lose to Georgia, Ole Miss, Tennessee, and Texas. Look at the rest of those teams on there, man. This Kentucky team can beat Auburn. It can beat South Carolina. It obviously can beat Vanderbilt. Obviously can beat Florida. It's been beating the stew out of Florida the last few years anyway. So I think that they could lose, their 4 hardest games, and as long as they don't lose to somebody that they don't have any business losing to, then I think it's going to be a pretty doggone good year. And I could see 8 wins for this Kentucky team for sure.
I think that they'll end up trading one of those hard games, like they'll beat a Tennessee and lose to an Auburn or something like that.
If they were going to be those really good teams on that schedule, who do you think it would be? And now I'm talking about Georgia, Ole Miss, Tennessee, and Texas. If they were going to beat one of those 4, who do you think it would be? Because let me tell you mine, and I'm going to tell you why I think this. I think it would be Texas, Mason. Mm-hmm. And the reason I think that is because I think, Kentucky can play keep away against Texas. I think they can run the ball very effectively, run clock, and really get Texas out of their rhythm and the way that they like to play football. But maybe 2A here. Think about the game that Texas is going to have that week 14. It's going to be that Texas A&M game. This is a look-ahead disaster for the Texas Longhorns that November 23rd weekend. They will be looking ahead to Texas A&M, a game that hasn't been played in years. Everybody in the world is going to be talking about it, and nobody's going to be talking about this Texas and Kentucky game. I think Kentucky has got a good shot at upsetting the Texas Longhorns that day. What do you think?
Yeah, I could totally see it. Like we mentioned, if they're able to take advantage of that secondary, I could totally see it. For me, the pick is Tennessee. I think it's the worst of the 4, pretty decidedly. So it's not like it's not a shocking pick or anything. But I also think, like I mentioned, this is a good matchup for Kentucky. You got a young quarterback still in Nico Iamaleava, and I think that defense is going to be very stingy. Kentucky's, that is. And I think that they're going to create problems. I think J.J. Weaver coming off the edge against Nico coming from that blind side, I think he's going to have himself a good day. And that's going to be a game that I circle as the season goes on. I think that Kentucky is going to play itself into a top 25 overall position and team. And if they beat Tennessee, people are going to be circling that Texas game at that point and saying, "Hey, if we win this one, we're going to be in the playoffs." And that's the type of exciting season that could be in store for the Kentucky Wildcats. I can't wait to see it. Honestly, for Kentucky, I think we've seen some ups and downs, and now we could see where on one of those up years for Mark Stoops in Kentucky, they're in a playoff game, right? And we're seeing potentially a game at Kroger Field, and just how awesome would that be in a chilly Kentucky environment? It would be just absolutely one of the best venues, I think, to have a playoff game at.
Absolutely. They would love to have that cold home field advantage. And if you're a Kentucky fan and you're watching to this point in the video, you need to just go ahead and hit the subscribe button because you've made it home, baby. You're with the First and Long College Football Show, and we want to have all of you rowdy Kentucky fans right there in the comment section throughout the college football season and throughout the offseason as well. Let us know what you think Kentucky's record is going to be this year. We're going to be breaking down Louisville. We're going to be breaking down Tennessee coming up pretty soon. So you've got to stay tuned to the First and Long College Football Show. Catch all of that content as we all get ready for the college football season in 2024 together as a First and Long family. So thank you all so much for watching, and you all have a great day. We'll see you next time.